to a bar and watch people. You'll see two different types of guys. There's one type of guy, it's a guy like me. We're usually sitting in the corner talking to each other. I don't know. Let's just talk to each other tonight, Brian. Then there's a second type of dude, the dumb dudes. They're at the bar, they don't care about anything. They're like, give me a shot of Jägermeister, drop it in a beer with a bunch of other shit. I'll say anything to anybody. And they go up to some girl, they're like, excuse me. I just wanted to say you look really beautiful tonight, and I was hoping one day I might be able to put my hands on your titties. My name's Kevin. Hi, Kevin, I'm Lisa. Do you want to be my boyfriend for 3 years? I don't know. Is it okay if I'm really shitty to you and cheat on you whenever I want? Yeah, that's fine. I'll never break up with you. Then they leave together. Meanwhile, I finally get up my courage. That's a nice jacket. Get the fuck out of my face.
Oh, Aziz. Oh, Aziz. Oh, Aziz. Aziz Ansari. More like Aziz should be sorry. Oh yeah, I got a new chair. Apparently the old one was too small. But back to Aziz. You may remember Aziz from Parks and Recreation as the 30-year-old who thinks he's 16. You may remember him as the guy in the strip club who got mad at you for saying, take it off. You may remember him from Pokemon as the Pokemon who evolves into a Jeep Pie. Or you may remember him as the guy being accused of sexual assault. Now, I'm not here today to tell you whether or not Aziz is a sexual predator, though I will say that regardless of what word you use to describe Aziz's actions, it's some of the most retarded shit I've ever heard. Do you want me to fuck you? No. Okay. Where do you want me to fuck you? Brilliant, Aziz, brilliant. I mean, this guy literally wrote the book on modern dating. How is he this bad at it? Also, it looks like there's no denying that the event described actually happened. Aziz himself released a statement in which he confirmed meeting her, he confirmed going out with her, and he confirmed doing sexual acts with her. And he didn't deny any of the individual things she said he did, which you'd think he would do if they hadn't happened. So it looks like the debate here isn't over whether or not it happened, but over whether or not it was consensual. But there is another factor in this whole scandal, one you might not have realized before. At least, that is, if you weren't woke enough to realize it. And that is our good friend...
white supremacy.
Oh shit, hold on. Keep supporting the Huffington Post by turning off your ad blocker. No. Anyway, it's time to talk about race and the Aziz story. I remember describing the first season of Master of None as a whiskey ginger. Hey, I get called that too. So warm, so refreshing, so cool. Okay, I don't get called that one as much, but it happens. Aziz Ansari's creation was like a bomb after so much disappointing television, filled with white faces. Oh my god, that's your standard? Hey, why didn't you like this show? Well, for one, there's white people in it. And telling the same stories ad nauseum. When I watched it, I felt like I was holding something new in my hands. Never had the brown immigrant experience been delivered to a mainstream audience in such a fresh and funny way. Well, I'm glad someone's finally teaching people that brown people aren't from around here. I felt like I was watching a show that valued and respected me, something that breathed like me. But I don't feel like that anymore. Earlier this month, the website Babe, it's a dumb name for a website, broke the story of an anonymous photographer, Grace, who went on a date with Ansari. Over the course of the night, Ansari repeatedly made Grace feel unsafe and uncomfortable. When she would move away from him, he'd pull her in. When she would say, let's chill, he'd put her hands on his crotch. He kept trapping her until she finally left. She cried in the Uber home. Fueled by the nuances and gray areas in Grace's story against the clear-cut backdrop of Me Too, Caitlin Flanagan, who had so far issued only clarion calls for the movement, wrote a piece for The Atlantic defending Ansari. Oh boy, side quest! The humiliation of Aziz Ansari. Allegations against the comedian are proof that women are angry, temporarily powerful, and very, very dangerous. Shocking! Women can, indeed, do bad things sometimes. I'm glad you finally figured that one out. Sexual mores in the West have changed so rapidly over the past 100 years that by the time you reach 50, intimate accounts of commonplace sexual events of the young seem like science fiction. You understand the vocabulary and the sentence structure, but all of the events take place in outer space. You're just too old. Fuck, that's depressing. This was my experience reading about the account of one young woman's alleged sexual encounter with Aziz Ansari, published by the website Babe this weekend. The world in which it constituted an episode of sexual assault was so far from my own two experiences of near date rape, which took place, respectively, during the Carter and Reagan administrations, roughly between the kidnapping of the Iran hostages and the start of the Falklands War. Thanks for telling me that I just couldn't pick up the tune. But, like the recent New Yorker story, Cat Person, oh boy, side quest! Yeah, I'm not actually going to read you all of that. Basically, it's a fictional story about a 20-year-old woman who gets to know an older man through text, then they go on a date, but she doesn't call it a date, and he spends the entire time trying to make sure she's okay with everything they're doing, and she assures him that she is okay with everything they're doing, but secretly she's not. Then she agrees to go home with him, and she wants to have sex with him, but then she finds out he's fat, so she doesn't want to have sex with him, but she has sex with him anyway. But then he does a good job at the sex, so then she does want to have sex with him, but then he asks if she's a virgin, and she laughs at him, and he gets sad because she laughed, and that makes her not want to have sex with him. She has sex with him anyway, and she spends the whole time not communicating with him and gets mad at him for not doing what she wants, even though every time she did tell him what she wanted, he did it. And then the sex is over, and she keeps not communicating with him, and she asks him to take her home, and he does, and then she ignores his texts, and then her roommate steals her phone and is really blunt towards him and says to never text again, and he complies 100%, and then this guy, who has literally spent the whole story respecting her boundaries and wanting to do what's right, texts her a month later and calls her a whore, and that's how the fucking story ends. Sorry, that was supposed to be a short summary. It got long. But like the recent New Yorker story Cat Person, about a soulless and disappointing hookup between two people who mostly know each other through texts,
My summary was better.
the account has proven deeply resonant and meaningful to a great number of young women, who have responded in large numbers on social media saying that it is frighteningly and infuriatingly similar to crushing experiences of their own. It is therefore worth reading and, in its way, is an important contribution to the present conversation. The next part of this just describes what happened in the initial article. Eventually, overcome by her emotions at the way the night was going, she told him, "You guys are all the fucking same," and left crying. I thought it was the most significant line in the story. This has happened to her many times before. I don't know if that's the case. It might be. But she could just be saying it because she's heard stories like this from other people. It could be that she's just been told that men are like this by people like Aziz, who go on and on about how awful men are to audiences full of people. Could even be that "you men are all the same" is just such a common expression that it's become some people's default response to a bad date. What led her to believe that this time would be different? Because Aziz is a woke feminist bae. I was a teenager in the late 1970s, long past the Great Awakening. Well, yeah, I'd imagine so. The Great Awakening happened in the 17-fucking-30s. Sexual intercourse began in 1963, which was plenty of time for me. What? But as far away from girl power as World War I was from the Tet Offensive. Jesus, you can really tell that this person got a history degree that they never got to put to good use. The great girl-shaping institutions. What? Significantly, the magazines and advice books and novels that I devoured were decades away from being handed over to actual girls and young women to write and edit. And they were still filled with the cautionary advice and moralistic codes of the 50s. With the exception of the explicit physical details, stories like Grace's, which usually appeared in the form of as told to, and which were probably the invention of editors and the work product of middle-aged women writers, those middle-aged women don't know what it's like to be women, were so common as to be almost regular features of these cultural products. In fact, the bitterly disappointed girl crying in a taxi, muttering, "They're all the same," was almost a trope. Hey, that's what I was saying. Make a few changes to Grace's story, and it would fit right into the narrative of those books and magazines, which would have dissected what happened to her in a pitiless way. When she saw Ansari at the party, she was excited by his celebrity. Grace said it was surreal to be meeting up with Ansari, a successful comedian and major celebrity, which the magazines would have told us was shallow. He brushed her off, but she kept after him, which they would have called desperate. Doing so meant ignoring her actual date of the evening, which they would have called cruel. Agreeing to meet up at his apartment, instead of expecting him to come to her place to pick her up, they would have called unwise. Ditto drinking with him alone. Drinking, we were told, could lead to a girl's getting carried away. I mean, it does. Drinking can lead to anyone getting carried away. That's sort of drinking's whole thing. Which was the way female sexual desire was always characterized in these things. As in, she got carried away the night of the prom. As for what happened sexually, the writers would have blamed her completely. What was she thinking, getting drunk with an older man she hardly knew, after revealing her eagerness to get close to him? The signal rule about dating, from its inception in the 1920s to right around the time of the Falklands War, what is it with you in the fucking Falklands War? Was that if anything bad happened to a girl on a date, it was her fault. Those magazines didn't prepare teenage girls for sports or STEM or huge careers. That is, common language of the most middle-of-the-road cultural products aimed at today's girls was totally absent. But in one essential aspect, they reminded us that we were strong in a way that so many modern girls are weak. Telling a girl that if she gets raped, it's her fault. The feminist thing to do. They told us over and over that if a man tried to push you into anything you didn't want, even just a kiss, you told him flat out you weren't doing it. If he kept going, you got away from him. Okay, fair enough. A good lesson for anyone, really. You were always to have mad money. Oh, you fucking know I got mad money, boy! With you. Cab fare in case he got fresh and then refused to drive you home. They told you to slap him if you had to. They told you to get out of the car and start wailing if you had to. They told you to do whatever it took to stop him from using your body in any way you didn't want, and under no circumstances to go down without a fight. In so many ways, compared with today's young women, we were weak. We were being prepared for being wives and mothers. Having a family makes you weak. Not occupants of the C-suite, but as far as getting away from a man who was trying to pressure us into sex we didn't want, we were strong. Was Grace frozen? Terrified? Stuck? I mean, a few times, yeah, she said she was. No! Oh. She tells us that she wanted something from Ansari and that she was trying to figure out how to get it. She wanted affection, kindness, attention. Perhaps she hoped to maybe even become the famous man's girlfriend. He wasn't interested. I think he made it clear that he was very interested. Too interested, even. What she felt afterward, rejected yet another time by yet another man, was regret. And what she and the writer who told her story created was 3,000 words of revenge porn. The clinical detail in which the story is told is intended not to validate her account as much as it is to hurt and humiliate Ansari. I mean, are we sure about that? Do we know why she wrote this? Together, the two women may have destroyed Ansari's career, which is now the punishment for every kind of male sexual misconduct, from the grotesque to the disappointing. Holy shit, we did it. We got them to admit that falsely accusing someone of rape can ruin their career, and we got them to admit that's a bad thing. And all it took was one brown person. 24 hours ago, this is the speed at which we are now operating, Aziz Ansari was a man whom many people admired and whose work, although very well paid, also performed a social good. He was the first exposure many young Americans had to a Muslim man. Wait, holy shit, Aziz is Muslim? I never knew. Like, it doesn't really matter, but I just figured I would have heard something about it before. Oh. Aziz described himself as not religious on Twitter. He was raised as a Muslim by his parents. I mean, I guess that counts. Who was aspirational, funny, immersed in the same culture that they are. Now he has been, in a professional sense, assassinated on the basis of one woman's anonymous account. Many of the college-educated white women who so vocally support this movement are entirely on her side. The feminist writer and speaker Jessica Valentine tweeted, "A lot of men will read that post about Aziz Ansari and see an everyday, reasonable sexual interaction. Well, I'll give you that it's certainly not reasonable, Jessica, I wish people would catcall me more, Valenti. Aziz was being a fucking moron. I think most people agree that regardless of whether or not it was abuse, it's a pretty bad way to handle yourself. But part of what women are saying right now is that what the culture considers normal sexual encounters are not working for us. I hate this weird men versus women way of painting this whole debate. Like the suggestion that just because a lot of women all kind of agree that they don't like something makes it inherently wrong. Your only argument for why something is wrong shouldn't be a lot of women don't like it. It doesn't matter what a lot of women like. What matters is what each individual person you act with wants. And that's true for men and women. Jessica, I like to take baths and cum, Valenti, even tries to say that it's just men who are calling this normal, as if that invalidates it, as if men don't know what it feels like to be raped. Also, these aren't working for us is a pretty ironic thing to hear from someone who had this as their Twitter heading. I thought it would take a little longer for the hit squad of privileged young white women to open fire on brown-skinned men. I had assumed that on the basis of intersectionality and all that, they'd stay laser-focused on college-educated white men for another few months. Holy fucking shit, lady. This is something I would say to parody something like you. You actually believe this? That it's okay to falsely accuse someone of rape as long as they're white and went to college? But we're at warp speed now, and the revolution, in many ways so good and important, you know, when you're going after white people and smart people, is starting to sweep up all sorts of people into its conflagration. Is starting to sweep up all sorts of people into its conflagration. Is starting to sweep up all sorts of people into its conflagration. Into its conflagration. The monstrous, the cruel, and the simply unlucky. Do you want to know the best part about this? The absolute best? Literally the last article that Flanagan wrote before she wrote this one was one demanding that people stop calling things like this a witch hunt. And now she's completely changed her tune because the person being accused is, well, brown. Apparently there is a whole country full of young women who don't know how to call a cab and who have spent a lot of time picking out pretty outfits for dates they hoped would be nights to remember. What a bunch of whores. They're angry and temporarily powerful, and last night they destroyed a man who didn't deserve it. What a riot. What an absolute riot. It turns out all you have to do to make people care about false accusations is make the accuser white and the accused brown. And all of a sudden they'll repeat word for word what their quote-unquote enemies have been saying this whole time, just with the words white and brown injected into them. But I guess now it's time to go back to that Huffington Post article we started with. Just give me a second here, I gotta change the disc. In addition to summing up Grace's experiences as 3,000 words of revenge porn, Flanagan claimed the story was just the hit squad of privileged young white women opening fire on brown-skinned men. She talked about his value as the first exposure many American TV viewers had to a relatable Muslim American man. White women, Flanagan said, are just trying to destroy a good brown man. Screaming racism when it doesn't exist is a distraction. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. As a brown woman myself, I don't buy this. I read and reread Grace's story, and every line felt like it could have been pulled out of my own life. I was reminded of all the one-sided college trysts that I later tried to laugh off with friends. I relived reckless nights in a stranger's home that could have gone so wrong if even one variable had changed. Ansari, who, like all South Asian men, looked like he could be my cousin or my uncle or my brother's best friend. Did this article just tell me that all Asians look the same? Was suddenly a stranger. Now I see myself in Grace more than I ever saw myself in Ansari. But of all the things to read into Grace's story, racism isn't one of them. This is not a story about race. This is a story about coercion and sexual misconduct. His skin color didn't give him any power over her. What? Are you saying that if they had been different races, that would have made things different? Like if he had been white and she had been brown, then he would have had power over her. And that would have made what he did worse? Bringing up his race, however well-intentioned by Flanagan, reflects poorly on all brown people. Lady, you're losing me. If calling Grace's experiences assault limits the movement as a whole, then so does screaming racism when it doesn't exist. It's a distraction. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying now. Never mind. Calling everything racist waters it down, and it makes people take actual racism like seriously. I got it. I get you. If Flanagan actually cared about brown men, I mean, she spent a whole article going on and on about how much she cares about brown men, she wouldn't have used Ansari's race so flagrantly in her article. By writing about Ansari's aspirational qualities, she is invoking society's stereotypes about dark-skinned and Muslim men being sexually deviant and misogynistic, while also trying to subvert those same stereotypes. She can't have it both ways. What? How? First, how is calling him aspirational making him out to be a predator? And second, how is she stereotyping him? She is literally telling people not to stereotype him. So, accusing a brown person of rape won't make people think brown people are rapists. But criticizing people who accuse a brown person of rape will make people think brown people are rapists? Furthermore, the women involved in the story about Ansari are not all white. Okay, fair point. The author of the piece, Katie Way, identifies as biracial. She identifies as biracial. What does that mean? You're either biracial or you're not. And the piece never specifies Grace's race. To assume she is white because she is a victim. No, she's not assuming she's white because she is a victim. She is accusing her of not actually being a victim, and saying the only reason she thinks she's a victim is because she is white. Plays into the offensive stereotypes about men of color as dangerous and hypersexed, and of white women as pure, perpetual victims. No, she was criticizing that idea. She was accusing white women of acting too much like victims. Flanagan inadvertently leaned on these stereotypes as part of her unnecessary defense. Flanagan set up the field for future racist arguments about brown male sexuality. Now, all that's left is for any racist to step up to the plate and take a swing. How do you not realize that the two of you are saying the same thing? We must certainly talk about race in conversations about sexual misconduct when it comes up. It's important, for example, to know that R. Kelly preys specifically upon black women. Doesn't that just tell us that he's attracted to black women? Systematic erasure of black women in conversations of sexual assault is one reason why Kelly's behavior has largely been ignored, and why he still has a career. How do you know that? How do you know that that's the reason why the story didn't blow up? It's also vital we understand that indigenous women are the most likely victims of sexual violence. I thought that was because people wear the wrong kind of hats in their Instagram posts. Sometimes a victim's or perpetrator's race is relevant to the conversation because it points to further power imbalances that gave rise to sexual violence. Let's interrogate the role of race in these situations. But let's not inject race when it doesn't matter, as Flanagan did. Otherwise, we might very well get a hit squad of emboldened white women lining up to take a shot at black and brown men. That's what Flanagan was warning against. I will not defend Ansari's alleged actions. What he's accused of doing was terrible. I will not choose between my gender and my race. I cannot and should not have to. Of course not. But Flanagan has put me and other people like me in a position where we must. Well, shit, that lasted all of about 2 seconds. Ansari's race is not relevant to Grace's truth. By crying racism where it doesn't exist, an analysis like Flanagan's distracts from real conversations about consent, and forces brown people to defend the person we once thought was so cool and refreshing, who now leaves bitter taste left in our mouths. No, it doesn't force you to defend him. She was the one defending him. You were the one defending the accuser. You keep saying that this other person is bringing up harmful stereotypes, but the reason why she's bringing them up is so she can talk about how bad they are. If bringing up a stereotype in order to criticize it means that you're promoting that stereotype, then by that logic, you're promoting stereotypes too, because you're bringing them up as well. How are you supposed to criticize an idea if you're not allowed to say what that idea is? This piece is part of HuffPost's brand new opinion section. For more information on how to pitch us an idea, go here. Yeah, here's an idea. Your opinions are bad. Well, what a fucking rabbit hole that was. Yeah, I saw the headline, "Let's Talk About Race" in the Aziz story, and I thought this article was going to be calling Aziz's accuser racist. What do you know, it turns out that this article is actually criticizing that idea. So I start to think that maybe it might actually be good. So then I check out the article that it's responding to, and we get what you'd expect, an article calling Aziz's accuser racist. And then I get linked to this weird sex fan fiction on the New Yorker. So now I'm ready to move back to the first article I found, because it seemed like that one was actually making sense. Then out of the blue, that article starts doing the same thing that the Babe article was doing. I had such high hopes for it, and then I went and threw it all away. So I guess what I'd like to say is, thank you, Aziz Ansari. If it weren't for your sexual misconduct, I wouldn't have been able to go on the adventure I went on today.
L is for the way you look at me. O is you're the only one for me. V is very, very extraordinary.
What is going on in here?
I'm just pooping.